Is Shingon Buddhism Vajrayana? When considering the differences between schools of Buddhism, often they are classified into three: Theravada, Mahayana, and Vajrayana. Sometimes these three are equated with regions of Asia where Theravada is equated with the south, which includes Sri Lanka, Thailand, Burma, Laos, and Cambodia. Mahayana is equated with the east, which includes China, Japan, Korea, and Vietnam, and Vajrayana with the north, which includes Tibet, Bhutan, and Nepal. The formula works for the most part; however, it fails to describe the historical map of Buddhism throughout Asia and the complexity of the rising and falling of traditions. It also fails to accurately place the Japanese Shingon and Tendai school that contain elements of what may be considered Vajrayana. This presentation has been inspired by a passage in the Advanced Buddhist Studies module lectures, which stated that Shingon Buddhism was not, in fact, Vajrayana. Also, from speaking to a Shingon priest who also had this view, that Shingon should not be considered a Vajrayana school, but a Mahayana school. This view, however, isn't shared between all of the Shingon sect, including the founder Kugai, who transmitted this form of Buddhism from China to India in the 8th century. Why then is there so much confusion? The allocation of the title Vajrayana Buddhism is most well known to be attributed to the Tibetan branch of Buddhism and other aforementioned northern schools. The Vajrayana school claims to be the third vehicle of a three-staged vehicle, tiered in terms of evolution and depth of Buddhism. Shingon, however, takes a 10-level tier approach, a schema based upon previous systems of classifications found in Huayan and Tiantai. Within this schema, the Mahayana is graded in terms of inferior Mahayana and superior Mahayana, which is a gradation seen earlier in the three turnings of the wheel doctrine found within Yogacara and Tathagata Garbha teachings. Nevertheless, we see a shared theme within the Shingon and Tibetan Vajrayana schools, where the historical Buddha is seen to have taught the teachings found within the suttas and sutras, but the Shingon and Tibetan school trace the teachings of their school back to a primordial Buddha, the Dharmakaya. Not only within the teachings of the respective schools do both have a shared common belief in the origin of their teachings, but, in terms of discernible history, both share a common Indian origin. However, each school disagrees in the significance of the deviation. The Shingon school traces its Indian origins via China, which received some of the relatively older versions of Tantra, and of which newer ones had received some level of scrutiny. These newer tantras involved antinomian acts as part of ritual practice, and included such taboo acts as the consumption of meat and alcohol, as well as sexual intercourse. These practices were not popular in the rather conservative culture of China, and so were not as widely accepted, meaning that minimal tantras of this higher classification, according to the Tibetans, would be accepted into the canon. To the Shingon monastics, they would therefore have received the final Buddhist tantric teachings before it had been polluted with impure Hindu practices, and to the Tibetan monastics, the Shingon school will have received the teachings before they had developed into their most advanced and final form. For this reason, there has not been much unbiased research comparing the two within the respective traditions. However, there has been some recent academic scholarship in this area. Since the two represent two branches of one system, the methodology of mutual illumination is used to examine and compare the two traditions in a way that brings about a mutual increased understanding. As previously mentioned, both schools take the Dharmakaya Buddha to be the originator of their teachings and practice. For Shingon, this division between the teachings of the Dharmakaya and the teachings of the Nirmanakaya is stated to be Taimitsu, esoteric, versus Tomitsu, exoteric, respectively. There is indeed some level of esoteric practices found within other schools of non-Vajrayana Buddhism, including the Theravada schools and Mahayana sutras. These Mahayana sutras can balance on the edge of being called tantras, with the uses of mantras in, for example, the Heart Sutra and the Surangama Sutra. Shingon itself is a word that derives from the Indian word for mantra, transliterated in Chinese as Chen Yan, true word. Shingon is therefore often labeled as Mantrayana for this reason, and the Shingon texts themselves attribute the path as the mantra path. Some importance to the Vajra as path, however, may be seen in the shared use of the Vajra as scepter and bell, a feature seen in only Tibetan Vajrayana and Japanese esoteric schools. Another reference to Vajra is found within the role of Vajrasattva, being the bodhisattva in which transmitted the teachings of the Dharmakaya to the first human recipient, Nagarjuna, who was the first human patriarch of the Shingon school. The key recipients of the Buddha's teachings within the foundational Shingon esoteric text, the Mahavairochana Sutra, is Vajrapani, a figure who has appeared within the Pali Canon as a protective deity. The oldest school of Tibetan Buddhism is the Nyingma school, and the later schools of Gelug, Kagyu, Shakya, and Jonang have their own autonomy. Each of these schools has more in common with each other than other non-Vajrayana schools. Comparatively, however, the division between the two Shingon schools of Kogi Shingon and Shingi Shingon is not as vast. Shingon has inherited a more specialized version of Tantra, with limited tantric texts and emphasis primarily on only two mandalas. Kukai, being the main transmitter of tantric teachings, means that the Japanese have inherited a more systemized and more uniform system of esoteric Buddhism, whereas Tibetan Buddhism shows much greater diversity in terms of interpretation and classification. Shingon Buddhism is also rather unique in its emphasis as a school on esoteric practice as a superior means for enlightenment. Where the Japanese Tendai school saw both esoteric and exoteric teachings as equal in potentiality for enlightenment, Kukai saw the esoteric teachings to be superior. Also, where the Tendai school saw all three bodies of the Buddha as one, Kukai saw the Dharmakaya as the one true body, and the other bodies as emanations. The Tibetan schools will see the Vajrayana as the third vehicle. However, they would also further classify the Tantric texts. The classification of Tantras in order of superiority to the Tibetans would be the Kriya, the Charya, Yoga, and the highest Yoga. The highest Yoga then divides into further divisions of mother, father, and non-dual. The Shingon teachings, although focused entirely on esoteric study, would have their tantras classified to the Tibetans as Charya or Yoga, and not considered to contain any teachings at the level of highest Yoga. The Tibetans are seen therefore to have the most advanced of the tantras. However, we do appear to have some teachings within the Japanese esoteric tradition that were held hidden and may have not been recorded as canonical. Such is the case of the Tachikawa school of Shingon, branded heretical by Orthodox Shingon for its openly antinomian acts. These were said to have been based on tantras that had come from India. Tibetan Buddhism, especially due to Chinese persecution, has made public much of their teachings. However, Shingon Buddhism has been very slow in revealing much to the outside world. One such example is the ritual of Kankiten, which is held with much secrecy. Another Shingon priest friend of mine has received the initiation into the ritual practice of Kankiten. However, there was much initial resistance, and only through luck and fortunate karma was he permitted. The publicly available practices of Japanese esoteric Buddhism are seen to lack what is referred to in Tibetan Buddhism as a completion stage. the dissolving of the deity into emptiness and the resting in natural awareness. This does not mean, however, that such a practice does not on some level occur within Shingon, since the theoretical foundations of this practice do indeed exist within the philosophy of Kukai. Kukai himself has described his path as the diamond vehicle, or Vajrayana, and so the association with Shingon as Vajrayana is fair. The main argument for this case may be in the fact that Kukai claims this teaching to be superior to that found within exoteric practice. The division of Mahayana emerged in a similar way, with the text speaking of a Hinayana, an inferior vehicle, and referring to their Buddhism as Maha, or great. Since Huayan and Tiantai grade other schools of Mahayana as inferior, they made sure to specify a difference within the Mahayana schools, some as provisional and some as final. However, Kukai made sure to emphasize that his teachings brought from China, which involved practical and ritual means to enlightenment, transcended that found within the Mahayana. This sharp distinction, therefore, is enough to designate Shingon as a separate yana to the other schools of Japanese Buddhism at the time. And although Saicho incorporated these esoteric practices into his Tendai school, he placed them on the same level as exoteric practice, meaning his school cannot be called a Vajrayana, but indeed Mahayana with Vajrayana teachings and practices. Shingon and Tibetan Buddhism indeed share much in common. Emphasis on ritual initiation, transmission from guru to disciple, ritual uses of mandalas, mudras, and mantras, and the invocation and union of deities makes for a very different and distinct form of Buddhism as that found within the Pali Canon and even Mahayana sutras. The history and practice of the two schools share a common path, and the Indian tantric tradition lives on outside of its home of origin within the foreign lands of Tibet and Japan, albeit with unique influences from the country it now resides in and the cultures it passed along through the way.